Friends, because I think you're going to find this man extremely interesting. He's an ex-British soldier, and 6 years ago, during the final minutes, and I mean the final minutes of the Falklands War, he was shot in the head by a sniper. And he spent 2.5 hours in the freezing cold before being flown in a helicopter with his head stuck out in the open air to a field hospital where he was left, again, without any attention, treatment, anesthetic of any kind, for another 4 hours, because they reckoned he was not going to live. He was so badly injured. And he wasn't a priority, so they left him on one side and went on with other people that they thought they could save. He lost 45% of his brain with this shot, and it included the motor side for the left side of his body, and he was later told that he would never walk again. Now, he was discharged from the British Army. His own account of his experience during and recovering from the Falklands War deviates, I would say, markedly from the generally accepted view of a sort of a tin pot army up against the might of the British Empire. And what's interesting is how he has been treated by his own government since he came back. He had every right to believe that he would come back a wounded hero, but that is not, alas, how he has been treated. He's told his own story in a book called When the Fighting is Over, and BBC have made a television documentary about him too, to be shown later on this one. Would you welcome, please, Robert Lawrence. Is the left arm completely paralyzed, Robert?
Yes, it is. Yeah.
And the leg, just a bit?
Toes and ankle have gone totally. Knee and hip are just weak now, but I managed to get them going.
Tell me about the moment when you were hit in the Falklands at Tumbledown.
Well, the battalion had fought the battle of Tumbledown. The majority of the battle was over. It was essential that we took the mountain before daylight, because the Argentinian artillery positions in Stanley, if they'd kept us on the mountain during daylight, they could have taken us out and counterattacked, knocking potentially the whole of the British forces back across the island and winning the war. So it was absolutely essential that we won that mountain that night. The battalion was stopped by an extremely heavy machine gun post on the end of Tumbledown Mountain. It had done enormous damage to the company before mine, and my company was called in to try and sort it out. Well, I led the attack on it, and we took it out, and we won that specific point. But I realized that we'd lost all our momentum. You know, we had our first wounded, our first Argentinian prisoners in our hands, and the boys stopped. I mean, we came to a grinding halt. We then came under severe sniper fire. So I took a couple of my men, and we went and took out the snipers. Unfortunately, the last one I didn't see, ran past him, and the one other man with me ran past him as well. He shot us both from behind.
That was the last minutes of the war?
An hour and a half before the ceasefire.
And can you remember what you were thinking a moment before you were shot?
It's very bizarre because, contrary to everything that's happened, it's relevant that I should notice that I'd wanted to go. I was excited by it. During the battle, I thought to myself, nothing will ever matter anymore. Nothing will ever affect me anymore. I thought to myself, this is the most incredible thing. Isn't this fun? And I literally said it to someone soon, just before I was shot.
Isn't this fun?
Yes.
And had you killed anybody at that stage?
Yes.
Who had killed?
A large number.
By shooting or by hand to hand? Did you run a bayonet through somebody?
I had a very unpleasant experience during which my bayonet snapped whilst attempting to kill a man, and I had to continue, obviously.
And that is when you see the guy's face, and
he says, please to you in English.
He said please to you?
Yeah.
After you...
Whilst I was attempting to kill him.
I see. And what did you do?
I had to continue. You know, I learnt my lesson in the end. The man I did pass, not killing, shot me from behind.
Now, when you've talked about the images of war being manipulated, would you expand on that a little for me?
Well, I think what scared me most, and I think what is the most relevant point of, if there is one, if you consider there is one, of my whole tale, is actually what happened on my return, because wars happen, and we can talk about that, but my experiences of war hopefully will not be experienced by anyone else, or if they do, it's their own experience, it's their own translation of the experience. What concerned me was a number of incidents happened over a period of time when I returned, and I had what I call a cynical awakening. And I realized that what was happening was that they were adapting these images, censoring these images, and being very clever with these images to ensure that the whole international incident portrayed the incident that they wanted. It portrayed victors, not victims. It portrayed a joyous occasion that we should all celebrate and that we should all be very proud of. Now, I happen to believe that we should be proud as a serviceman of having done such a good job. I believe that a lot of the principles and standards that I've been brought up to believe in are still quite correct. What I discovered was that I feel that the rulers weren't believing in those principles and standards themselves. That came out in the version of, for instance, on my return, no press were allowed to be there to meet the wounded, which was step one. I then discovered that a certain number of wounded seemed to have been hand-picked because they had what was seen as the right image wound. You know, they had a limp, they had the action man scar, whatever, and they were then photographed. So the wounded...
You weren't?
Not the people who were badly burnt or lost limbs, or in my case, had a large hole in my head. And that doesn't...
And you were left lying, just to go back to your wound again, you were left lying for 4 hours without treatment. Were you were conscious all of that time?
Fully conscious throughout the time. I think, you know, one has to be careful because I don't feel that one should look too deeply at the incidents within war. War's an extremely difficult thing to carry out. You have an enemy attempting to ruin everything you do. The reason I was left was a helicopter couldn't get in to get me out. The reason I was left waiting at the refrigeration plant was that there were other people that had to have attention. So, although it's horrific and adds to my experience, it's not the danger. That's not the worry. The worry is this manipulation, this changing of the facts, so that, for instance, at the Victory Parade, no wounded take part. At St. Paul's Cathedral during the memorial service, the wounded that went, of which I was one, were not allowed to wear uniform because we don't want to see uniformed soldiers in wheelchairs. And that's what's very worrying, very, very worrying.
Yes, and then the lousy deal with the motor car. What was that?
It's almost bizarre. I mean, it's almost amusing.
Awful.
Well, I mean, having been banned from wearing uniform, what happened was we were told that British Leyland were going to kindly give us a free motor car.
How many of you?
A handful, a number that they picked. And obviously they were going to give us what they saw as the best car for us, so we went along to the garage to be checked out. And the salesmen were fantastic. You know, we had a laugh where I banged my head getting into a Triumph Claim, and they said, no, take it away. Brought out an Austin Princess, and I jammed my knee under the steering wheel. And they said, take it away. I ended up with a Rover, and this car suited, and I was very pleased in a way. So I was then called back a couple of weeks later and told I had to wear uniform this time and wear medals. And when I arrived to receive my keys, discovered it was in fact the publicity launch of the Maestro. So we were useful suddenly in uniform. The sadness was that those 3 weeks later, when I received the real car, I discovered my South Atlantic Fund payment, which was a charitable payment, was docked £11,500 for the price of the car minus an 18% discount for being disabled. Well, it's worrying. It's very worrying.
And that fund was set up specially for people like you?
That fund, according to the deeds of the trust, was specifically set up after spontaneous contribution by the British public for the wounded and bereaved of the Falkland Islands conflict. It then had added to it, and for the men of the services who have to continue to work in the arduous conditions of the South Atlantic Fund. So one worries about that as well.
And they docked you the price of the car. And you had plainly been given the impression that this was a prize for you, this was a compensation for you, or a little gift or whatever.
Which was why we went through the process of checking the cars.
In recognition of services, yes. You're married, you have a baby now, and I know you live in a country cottage because you moved out of London because you were being mugged. Looking back on it now, Robert, your father was an army man,
a Royal Air Force,
Royal Air Force, military man anyway, and you were born almost to be a soldier. Looking back on it now, are we talking about the total futility of war? Are we talking about complete loss of belief in war?
Well, I mean, I think there has been a complete loss of belief in war, and I think that's a good thing. I think anyone that takes part in the war stops believing in war. I think what there really has...
Say that again.
Anyone who takes part in a war realizes how unpleasant they are, and stops believing it, or believes rather that as much effort and cost that goes into war should first go into making sure it never happens. I think what got me was that I realized through this period afterwards that you could never believe what you were being presented through your television, through your newspapers, through any kind of reporting. And if you don't know the facts, and you don't know that the facts are true, then how can you be a democracy? How can you vote correctly? How can you use whatever few powers are left to British citizens in governing themselves? And you realize that, in fact, you're not a democracy anymore.
Well, that's kind of dangerous talk coming from you with your family background and so on, because you would have been accepted as a pillar of the establishment.
Yes.
What rank were you?
Well, I was made up to captain. I was a lieutenant.
Captain in the British Army, you know, you would have certain beliefs, certain values, all of that sort of thing. And here you are talking mild subversion, when in fact we all know that all governments manipulate the media insofar as they're allowed to.
Yes.
And it's mean and it's underhand and it's rotten, but they all do it.
Yeah. But, you know, firstly, they shouldn't, you know,
yes.
And anyone who hopefully has the guts or the opportunity should point out that they shouldn't and should try and get a movement going to stop them. Secondly, one can have, other countries do have, sort of Freedom of Information Acts that govern against that kind of manipulation. I mean, it's bizarre. It appears that Great Britain is one of the few places that doesn't have it. America has it. Canada has it. Australia has it. 21 members of the European community have it. England doesn't.
Join the club. Looking back on it now, what are your feelings, A, about having killed men? You see, it seems to me that it could be said that you're complaining because you're wounded, whereas didn't they always tell you that the purpose of an army is to shoot the other guy before he shoots you? Sure. That's what an army is for, to kill. You're trained to kill. And that would have been fine if you come back as a glorious hero in your uniform and your medals and all of that. But now that you're wounded, you're complaining.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I mean, I don't believe I am, because I'm not actually complaining about having taken part in the war. I'm proud to have actually taken part in it, because I was trained as a soldier. I went and did my duty. I won a military cross. I did my job well, and I'm proud to have done my job well. I'm proud to, in the final test, have come up with the goods. I'm not even complaining about having gone to the war. I happen to believe that by the time I sailed on the QE2, there were 11,500 armed Argentinians on the Falkland Islands, and I purely don't believe that anyone has the right, by force, to enforce their wishes on someone else.
So you were in favor of the war?
I was in favor of going by the time it got to the stage I went. Whether it should have ever happened in the first place is something very different. And whether, because the army then goes and sorts it out, that government should get back in is a totally different question as well.
Yes, we must assume that. But certainly it was manipulated to their advantage. So the Argentinian army then, the other point, just passing by, the Argentinian army was not a tin-pot rookie outfit as far as you were concerned, were they?
No, I mean, there's no doubt about it. They had conscripts down there. They had young conscripts a lot, and a lot were caught in Goose Green, Darwin. But, you know, all you have to do is look at the map of the islands, and you'd realize that any Argentinian general would probably put outlying rings of his forces to slow down and tire out and waste the British army as they attempted to cross the islands and put your conscripts furthest out. Well, of course, that meant that they were the first to be beaten, the first to be caught. They then hit the newspapers, and everyone believed from that minute onwards that that was all they had. In fact, Argentina had had its own dirty war, its own civil war going on for a number of years. They had a large military organization with a lot of equipment, a lot of money spent on them. They were being run by a military junta.
Sure. Well, Galtieri has been in jail ever since.
Yeah.
They put him in a dungeon and threw away the key. So when you were going in, then it was tally-ho. This is wonderful fun, and the British Army were going to get these guys out, and the war was justified. And
yeah, I mean, all I'm saying is that I think that I was in the wrong because of my age and because of my experience. And I believe if one's ever going to change these things or affect these things, one has to accept human nature in the first place and understand that it's potentially there. You can't just say, I'm a pacifist, young men shouldn't do this, and leave it at that. That might be true, But young men do it. Young men do it all over the world. There is an attraction to the services, to that kind of power, to that kind of job. And you've got to accept that and understand that if you're ever going to do anything about it.
But in some, you believe that you've been treated rotten by the British government.
I don't believe I've been treated particularly rotten. I have a good pension. I had a good settlement from the South Atlantic Fund. There was an enormous amount of lack of understanding over that period. It took a year and a half for any of us to get any money like that. And all we wanted to do at that time was get on with a new life, and we couldn't. I don't think that's the problem. As I say, I think the problem is, the danger is that the British public are being conned as it goes along afterwards.
How much trouble has there been about Tumbledown, the movie, the BBC? They're showing it on the 31st of May now.
Well, there's always trouble with that kind of thing. You know, the press like to label it, categorize it. People are scared by it. There is a paranoia, and it was partially that paranoia that fueled me and kept me going. One realized that, you know, why were they frightened? What were they upset about? If they had nothing to be scared of, why couldn't they just be open?
Were there any direct approaches made to you to say,
yes.
you know, Robert, shut up?
I mean, how seriously one should take them or not. I got a telephone call from a senior army officer who said, Robert, what's happened with this effing film? And I said, well, it's being effing made. And he said, well, this is just a gypsy's warning. Stop it. Well, it's interesting.
Thereafter, nothing. Line one, you say, Don. Okay, I'll take line one then. Hello, line one.
Good evening, Gay.
Yes, sir.
Good evening, Robert. I'd just like to ask you, Robert, when Tumbledown is shown and people have read your book, do you think it will change the attitude of people and the establishment towards ex-servicemen like yourself?
Well, I hope partially it will. What I hope for is a bigger thing than that. I hope that in the end what will happen is that it will join a number of other things as a movement, a number of other people questioning other things, other incidents, and one will eventually end up in a situation where hopefully things are changed and things are done.
But men will still go to war and politicians will still send armies into war.
Presumably, unless we can stop them.
Never stop them.
Well, maybe not, but we can try.
Armies, prostitutes and the poor we have always with us, I guess.
Sure.
And you say, do you now regret that you ever joined the army? Do you regret
I joined the army a long time ago now. Yes. I mean, it doesn't look it, but I joined the army sort of over 10 years ago, and I'm me because I've done it, and it's part and parcel of me and can't be separated now. So I don't regret it. I've learned from it. I've become what I am because of it, and that's part of it.
Will the arm ever come back, Robin?
No. No, I have, you know, as you said, 45% of my brain missing. I have a 4.5 by 3.5 inch hole here.
Filled in with what?
Acrylic.
Acrylic? But the hair has grown right over it.
Yes, I have a scar that starts there and runs across the top and across the top here. Because it blew from the inside out. The bullet was doing 3,800 feet per second.
And where did it go in?
Back here. And came out there.
It came out through the... went right through and out
right
here.
Through the brain, right down the other side.
I saw photographs of you on the operating table, which are quite gruesome. I mean, you should be dead, there's no doubt about it. Another millimetre either way?
Well, it shouldn't have to be another millimetre, it should kill you. The way a high-velocity bullet works is that the piece of lead is travelling so fast, it builds an air turbulence around it and a vacuum behind it, and that's what does the destruction.
Do you know, what a daft question, do you know what happened to the guy who shot you?
I'm not sure.
You lost interest very quickly.
Very quickly.
Yes, you lost it, indeed. I just wondered, did anybody ever tell you? Yes, love, did you want to say something? Yeah, you've got 1 minute left to go in the programme.
What's his own feelings if his own family wants to join up with the army, any army?
He has a little fella called Conrad. How old is he?
He's 5 months.
Five months.
He's a bit small at the moment.
Yeah.
Well, if he ever did, I think what I'd do was similar to what my father did, which was ensure that hopefully he understands the realities of what he might be asked to do, the realities of the job, its limitations. I think what I would add to it that my father never added to me was that if anything ever goes wrong, and I think it applies to a lot of organisations in this world in general now, don't expect any of the loyalty to be returned, because it won't be. And I think that applies to a lot of organisations now.
politicians the world over. That's it.
And is your 5-month-old son, is he showing any fighting? Is he fighting?
He fights a lot.
Fights all right. He fights all right. You can bet on it. Robert Lawrence's book is called When the Fighting is Over. Remarkably good title. A personal story of the battle for Tumbledown Mountain and its aftermath. Thank you for joining us, Robert. We wish you well. Thank you very much. Robert Lawrence.
Just over 2 months after the invasion, the British were close to victory. But the capital, Port Stanley, was still in Argentine hands. To reach Stanley, Robert's battalion of Scots Guards first had to take Mount Tumbledown. Under cover of night, they began their assault.
I remember the first Argentinian that I attempted to take out. And then eventually seeing a guy who I obviously had successfully hit. This was something I was watching through a small green television type screen in a night sight, and therefore it was very much a detachment. I thought, yeah, I got hit, was all I would have thought, to be honest.
Robert was ordered to clear a machine gun post. In the heat of battle, he took desperate measures.
You were going in hard, and you were going in fast, and you were absolutely adamant that you will win. Rules of engagement no longer applied. White phosphorus grenades are designed to give smoke. You're not meant to use them against people because they're very nasty. Well, all of that goes out the window and you do whatever it takes. I can strongly recall thinking to myself that it morally wasn't as hard to try and kill a man as I thought it might have been, but that it was physically much harder. Realize that you have hit a guy and that he's still coming at you. And that's a bit disconcerting. The first man I saw that I decided I would use my bayonet on, I thought was probably dead. But he was fully armed, so rather than just run past him, as I went past him, I stuck my bayonet into his upper arm. He span on the ground like a caught salmon and snapped my bayonet in the process. And I was immediately wondering what the hell I'd done that for. At which point I had no choice but to complete the work. Not a pleasant experience. And an experience that I dealt with at one point whilst bayoneting was to discover that the guy I was attempting to kill spoke a degree of English, which was a bit of a surprise. And I can remember him saying please to me. He is taking a bayonet in the face, he is taking it in the throat or the mouth. It does become pretty harsh. They are trying to stop you doing it for obvious reasons.
Robert fought his way up to the higher slopes of Tumbledown. Now he took cover with another guards officer. Port Stanley was in sight, and they were close to victory.
I said to him, "Isn't this fun?" Because that's where my heart was at. We were doing our job. To that point, we were clearly winning. It was fun. And it would be a lie for me to say that it wasn't fun, because that's how you feel, that's how you keep yourself going.
Moments later, an Argentine sniper who'd evaded Robert's assault shot him in the back of the head. Bleeding and paralyzed, he was helicoptered to a field hospital. As he lay on the operating table, surgeons realized he had lost about 40% of his brain. Robert Lawrence arrived home from the Falklands. Doctors still feared that his head injury was so severe he would die. His recovery was long and painful, and to this day, he remains partially paralyzed.
It's not the going to war that's a problem for most soldiers, it's the returning home. During a conflict, everything is heightened, and that includes your behavior, your reactions, your responses too. It's a little like living your life with your music turned up full volume, and then getting home and being told that you've got to turn the music down to a third. Well, that's fine when everything's sweet and dandy, but when then buttons are pushed in civilian life, there is a temptation to turn that volume switch straight to 15.
Robert Lawrence has done many jobs since his injury caused him to return to civilian life. Now he raises money for his own charity, which takes veterans abroad on high-octane motorcycle trips.
It is unpleasant. It does affect you for your life. I was shot through the head and I'm physically paralyzed or maimed for life. But it would be a lie to say that and not say that I wanted to go to the Falklands, because I did. It would be a lie to say that and not say I was proud to have fought for my country, because I am proud to have fought for my country. And it would be a lie to pretend that killing was such an awful experience that, you know, I'm appalled and shattered by it. I would rather kill a man today than a rabbit. There that's going. So the idea that I have an issue over having killed some of them is just rubbish, and always would be rubbish. I have no problem with killing people at all.